Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be looking at 5 ships that are well suited for ranked battles at tier 6. In one of the development blogs a short while ago, it was announced that the next series of ranked battles is going to be played at different tiers. Starting off at Bronze, where it will be played at tiers 6 and 7, hence I thought I would compile a small list of ships that are all round good performers, which may come in handy for you. The thing about playing at tier 6 is it will undoubtedly be more difficult to play, as you are pretty much guaranteed to be up-tiered, opposed to playing in tier 7 ships. Since we are covering tier 6, this means we can look at one of every class, since carriers will be allowed unless any changes are announced, meaning regardless of the class you main, there is always something for you to choose. To start off the list, at number 5 we are looking at the premium German destroyer T-61. Although over the years, many new destroyer lines have been introduced into the game, and some do perform very well, I still believe T-61 would be a very good pick for the fact it's an incredibly strong destroyer, and I would argue that with the Commander rework, it's been made even stronger if you spec it for torpedoes. On a side note, with all these ships I'll start off with the bad points, or just things that you should consider about the ship before playing, as I feel that is what would be the most useful, and then I can cover the good points where you can decide if the good attributes outweigh the bad. So some of the things that you should consider about T-61 is it is rather susceptible to aircraft, in numerous ways. Firstly, like any destroyer, rocket planes will be the bane of your existence, and also because T-61 is rather large, it's a lot easier to hit. Once you have the attack or fighters spotting you and attacking you, you will be spotted for a good amount of time, allowing your opponents to open fire, and as I just said about size, means there's a good chance for some of those shots to hit, which can make it rather difficult to play. Alongside being spotted by air, there's also the slim possibility of radar, which will pretty much have the same effect. Now, the chances of getting radar are somewhat slimmer than in regular games, as the only radar-capable ship in Bronze will be the Indianapolis, so if you do come against one, make sure you keep your distance. Now onto why T-61 has been picked. It is incredibly strong, it has a great hit pool, so even if it is going against another destroyer with a higher DPM, you could still come out on top due to that advantage. As well as this, the torpedoes are just generally quite incredible. Although they have only got a range of 8 kilometers, when they are spec'd pretty much entirely for torpedoes, you can get the 2 quad launchers firing off every 61 seconds, and they'll be going at 72 knots, which is getting into European destroyer torpedo speeds. So you will be doing loads of damage and causing lots of floods, so especially when you're kiting away, you can really cause some havoc. If you are attacking with torpedoes, this will be more difficult, but let's say you are pushing a destroyer in a smoke, you have got a great hydroacoustic search, so when you're getting towards that smoke, you can pop that, spot the destroyer that's in there, and you can start gunning them down without them being able to do anything in return, because they won't be able to see you. And overall, it's an all-round great destroyer that should allow you to have lots of fun in. I have also done a review on the ship since it's going to be getting removed in the next few patches, so if you wanted a more in-depth look at the T-61 then you will find a card above which you should find rather helpful. Now if you wanted to benefit from having fast torpedoes, then the non-premium alternative would be the European destroyer Västerås. This is because it does have basically the same torpedoes, same range, they're very quick, but the ship itself does have many differences, such as a lack of smoke, so if it was just the torpedoes you're after, then Västerås would be a good non-premium choice. Next up, taking the 4th spot, we've got Perth. Now, this is certainly a hard one to pull off, as it's a rather easy ship to knock out. However, if it matches your preferred playstyle of generally being irritating and taking full advantage of positioning, it's a ship that you will find very useful. As I just mentioned, it is a rather easy ship to knock out, with only 27,000 HP, and without the most armour, so some well-aimed shots can probably take it out in mere seconds. And that's quite possible considering you'll need to get relatively close to your targets due to your rather short firing range. If you are happy with these drawbacks however, then Perth can be quite a formidable ship. To begin the rather long list of perks this ship has, the first is an incredibly low detection range, which will be very useful, especially if you're not playing against a carrier, as you are very well equipped to hunt down destroyers. Whilst on the topic of destroyers, it is also rather easy to manoeuvre away from their torpedoes, due to a short rudder shift time and a 700 meter turning circle, which is further aided with the bonus of having a hydroacoustic search. This will allow for hunting down destroyers regardless of if you're using your crawling smoke screen or not. On the topic of smoke screens, because it's crawling, it allows you to maintain a slow speed, which makes it much harder for ships to blind fire you, whilst at the same time it's possible for you to spot them. This is because with Perth, you have got the choice between a spotting and fighter aircraft, so when you are travelling alone in smoke, you can activate your fighter, which will then spot the enemies around you, allowing you to start wearing them down with very little risk to yourself. There is the fact that the guns aren't the best on this ship, however, in this ship, unless you are hunting down a destroyer, you are going to be playing more of a supporting role anyway, by adding cumulative damage by focus firing on ships that the rest of your team has, either with straight up damage or setting fires. I would recommend that you take the India X-ray and Victor Lima signals because this will increase your fire chance, as it is somewhat low, but over time that shouldn't matter too much because that will boost it up to 10% fire chance. Finally, with the consumables that I just discussed, Perth is very, I would not say reliant on them, but they do really boost her performance, which is a good thing, as for 3 of the 4 upgrade slots, you are able to buy special upgrades from the armory to bolster their stats even more. In slot 1, you can equip the Spotting Aircraft Modification 1, and this will extend the Spotting Aircraft's flight time by 30%. This will allow you to spot enemies for much longer and take more of an advantage of your smoke. In spot 2, you are able to equip Hydroacoustic Search Modification 1, which will extend the action time by 20%, which again is very useful both for when you're sitting in your smoke and wanting to look for torpedoes, or let's say you are rushing a smoke and you want to flush out the destroyer, so overall it is a very useful upgrade. And then finally, for slot 3, if you've got the Smoke Generator Modification 1, this will extend the emission time of the smoke by 30%, so this is how long the generation of it is, so because it's crawling, it's basically emitting every few seconds, whereas a normal one, it will create the smoke for say 20 seconds, and then the lasting time of it will be a minute or something, but with this instead, that 30% bonus is how long it will be generating for, so you can travel for a lot longer under the cover of smoke. This does, however, reduce the duration of the clouds by 5%, but that really isn't the issue because the whole point of this is you're going to be producing the smoke, not sitting in it, so with all those 3 upgrades, this will make Perth incredibly effective. Now, with all of that covered, I have to say Perth certainly has a high skill floor, especially in a competitive scenario going against many tier 7 ships. However, if you are able to master the rather unique playstyle, then I'm almost certain this will make for a lot of fun games. Now, if you don't have Perth, then a non-premium alternative would be the Leander, as that is another good pick, however it does have a slightly different playstyle to Perth. Halfway through the list, the ship in 3rd place is the aircraft carrier Ryujo. This isn't a fact of it does something incredibly well, or it's overpowered, but more that it's just a decent carrier that has a lot of good points and the negatives are rather easy to work around. Alongside this, it's a rather easy ship to attain and performs quite well. You do have other ships such as the Irish Löwenhard, which from what I've seen it is very good, especially at knocking out destroyers and in general has very effective bombers. However, because I don't yet own this ship, I wouldn't like to give advice on something I don't own as I can't speak for its performance. To begin, not so much of an issue is that although the rocket attack aircraft are very accurate, you may have a hard time hitting destroyers, especially when they are quick. This is because the rockets are accurate, but you do not have that many, so you do need to aim quite well. This is not a problem with practice, but if you have just gotten the ship, then this is just something that you should keep in mind. Now, one way to counter that is if you warn your team in advance when you're going to spot a destroyer, so instead of using the planes just for an attack, you'll have part of your team ready to fire on any destroyer you spot, mitigating that issue entirely. The other thing to consider is that when using the AP bombers against smaller targets, there is a good chance the bombs will not hit their target, so if you are going to be attacking smaller cruisers, you'd have a better chance of hitting them using torpedo bombers, which is one of the things that makes Ryujo a very good ship. One thing to keep in mind is the planes do have somewhat lower health pools than other carriers of the same tier, so it is a good idea to spec for the survivability of your planes. Now, as just mentioned, Ryujo does have great torpedo bombers, which will be perfect for hunting down almost anything. For battleships or heavily armoured cruisers, these will be easy to hit, and with large squadrons, you'll be able to perform multiple runs, causing a good amount of damage, and as well as this, there's a chance you'll cause some flooding. Then for smaller and faster targets, because you can perform multiple runs, even if you do miss your first run, you'll be able to make them lose speed because they're turning, which will give you a greater chance of striking them a second time. A good strategy for using these planes is try to single out ships, especially any with low AA ratings, because this will mean you can knock them out of the game with relative ease. Although the AP bombers may miss, on larger targets, especially with thinner decks, they can be rather effective. This is because when you're getting citadels, it will allow you to cause irreparable damage, which over the course of a match will really benefit your team. And really, just to conclude, Ryujo is just an overall decent carrier which should perform pretty well. Taking second place, we have got the US cruiser Pensacola. The reason this is so far up the list is because of how well it will perform. Even if it was, say, lined up against a team entirely comprised of tier 7 ships, it still has a good chance of coming out on top. This isn't just a guess, as I've seen last year firsthand how powerful they can be in a game, as during the summer of 2020, Clan Battles was played at tier 6, where both Pensacola and Graf Spee were heavily used ships. Now, Graf Spee could be used, as it's still a great pick, however, it is something I can see being used a lot, so I thought I'd talk about something else, and this is why we're looking at Pensacola instead. It does have its weaknesses, such as if you show almost any side, you will be punished, and after that point there is nothing you can do as you've not got a repair party, so any bad positioning will result in you losing a decent amount of health. Another thing to keep in mind is it has got agonisingly slow turret traverse, comparable to those of battleship turrets, so the grease the gear skill is pretty much essential. Finally, its AA is not enough to ward off an attack, however a good counter is you have got fighters, so even though your base AA cannot knock out enemy planes quickly, fighters will keep you safe. One thing that I would recommend is not using the fighter consumable until you find yourself alone, as let's say you're in a group of ships, cumulative AA should keep you pretty much safe, but when you're alone, that is when fighters will become pretty much essential. Now as to why Pensacola is so good. To start, since it had an armour buff, its bow is incredibly thick, sitting at 25mm. This means that many of your opponents won't be able to overmatch your bow unless they've got over 358mm guns. Examples of this could be Nagate's 410mm guns, but aside from that, this is why I say it's got such potential just because of how much damage it can brush off when nose in. As well as defensive, it has got 10 very powerful 203mm main batteries, which when combined with the tight firing angles allows it to punish anything that sits in its path. Even when facing tier 8 battleships, the guns can reliably get 4,000 to 8,000 damage salvos, so that too will allow it to be very effective, especially when you are holding strategic points and bottlenecks. As for the consumables, Pensacola does come with the option of hydroacoustic search, which will be very useful, as the detection range of the ship is rather high, so most likely you will be one of the first ships targeted by destroyers in the game, so when you feel like a destroyer is around dropping torpedoes, that can be very helpful due to the lack of heal, so damage prevention is the real key to success. Overall, it's a solid ship that should perform rather well, so that's why it's sitting in second place. Now for number 1, I am a little biased on this as it is one of my favourite ships, which is Warspite. This is not just for the fact that I like the ship, it's incredibly strong, and even when facing tier 7 ships it can hold its own incredibly well, both on the offensive and defensive. Plus, as previously mentioned, last year Clan Battles was held at tier 6, when I took lead in Warspite, 10 of the 11 games that were played, we won. So just for that reason alone is why I will be playing her a lot in Ranked. It does have some bad points, like any other ship, but nothing severe enough to warrant not playing in it. I think the most apparent negatives of this ship come from its manoeuvrability. It is a little bit slow with a top speed of just 23.5 knots, but that can be improved with the Sierra mic signal, and it does take quite a long time even to get to that speed. With this, alongside the fact it has got a pretty huge superstructure, that does mean it will also suffer pretty badly when it comes under fire from HE spam or attacks from rocket or HE bombers, as it takes time to reposition or manoeuvre away. Although those points did sound rather damning, the good points of this ship really make up for them. Firstly, with taking damage, and how susceptible it is to losing health, it does come with a rather good repair party, allowing it to recover almost a fifth of its health back from full penetration damage, and is great at mitigating HE spam. Alongside this, the damage control party consumable has a rather short cooldown of 60 seconds, so you are more than free to repair floods or fires, as anything permanent won't be as long-lived compared to some other Warspite counterparts. If torpedoes are spotted in time, although the torpedo protection isn't great, the turning circle is. At 550 meters, this allows for very tight turning, which with enough warning allows for moderately easy dodging of torpedoes. And when paired with the steering gears in modification 1, this means you can get the rudder shift down to a mere 11.3 seconds, allowing for very easy dodging of torpedoes. Continuing the survival aspect of this ship, the armour is good for its tier 2. Having 26mm of plating, it means it has got a slightly better bow tanking potential, as was discussed with Pensacola, so it can't be overmatched by anything with up to 387mm, which will help it stay alive for longer as well as hold islands and key positions rather well. Now for warding off destroyers and staying alive, the secondaries are pretty decent too. You have got 8 on each side, and they have got pretty good accuracy, a good fire rate, and with a base range of 5km, this means that with a full secondary build, it allows you to get them to reach up to 7.6km whilst using the Mike Yankee Sock 6 flag. That alone will allow for some pretty fun brawling engagements, plus it will ensure destroyers keep their distance. Now the main point of Warspite is her main batteries. Although it doesn't have as many guns as other battleships at the same tier, they really pack a punch. With 8 381mm guns, you'll be able to overmatch many cruisers and battleships that you will face in these battles, and at longer ranges with plunging fire, Warspite has a knack for having some pretty devastating salvos. With the HE shells, those are pretty good too, with a fire chance of 34%. If you're not having the best time with AP, you'll almost certainly be able to burn your targets down. As an overview, in the correct hands, even when facing much stronger opponents, Warspite can cause some serious damage, and has some real possibility of changing the outcome of a game. Now that brings us to the end of the video. Even though these are some great ships that have the potential to perform really well, it's not the ship that matters, it's the player. If you are really comfortable in a ship that most would totally disregard, then that will be the ship for you, not what some guy on the internet tells you is good. But with all that covered, I do hope this has been informative, or in the least it has given you some ideas what could be interesting to play. With all that covered, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and when these ranked battles change, hopefully you get some good games, and with all that said, I'll see you in the next one.